I have so much fun putting together my big end of year lists, looking back and waxing poetic over all the things that reaffirmed my love for anime over the last 4 seasons. But honestly, I think I look forward to doing this worst of list most of all, because this is the one time a year I get to really let off steam over everything I've got to deal with for the sake of that love. The mountains upon mountains of garbage I've got to dig through to find all the hidden gems and truly great trash that I recommend to you guys. Shouting your passion from the rooftops is always a good time, but sometimes you just need a good vent. And from profound disappointments to eye-searingly ugly nonsense, 2024 has given me plenty to vent about. If you'd like to thank me and my editors for all of that suffering, or for all of the work that it's taken to write and edit like an entire feature film's worth of anime opinions between this and the best and trashiest video, please consider hitting that like button. And also, since a lot of you mentioned in that last video that you've missed some of my other ones throughout the year, remember that ringing the notification bell is the best way to ensure you see all the future fruits of our labor. You'll see the particularly stinky fruits you're here for in just another minute though, because the worst anime of 2024 is sponsored by Girls Frontline 2 Exilium. Geoff Thew is a graphically and tactically dense 3D strategy RPG where you collect and command a squad of tactical dolls to conquer contaminated zones and fight back against a sinister conspiracy within a war-torn future world. Exploiting interactive terrain and intertwining type advantage systems based on equipped weaponry and innate elemental attributes to dig out entrenched enemy positions and dominate the battlefield in deep and highly replayable missions. Once you hit level 20, you can also join a platoon to gain access to daily missions and platoon supplies, plus start competing in the brand new Gunsmoke Frontline mode to earn reputation points for even greater rewards. These dolls aren't just killing machines though, they're also dolls, which you can dress up and pose all pretty to your liking, with various unlockable idle animations showing them in cute scenes of daily life around your on-base dormitory. And to get you started for both combat and cute posing options, the targeted procurement banner for the new update offers increased drop rates for the elite dolls Tololo and Macchiato, both of whom have cute new outfits out in the newest update, on top of Macchiato's deadly new elite heavy rifle, Bittersweet Caramel, which, man, you just gotta love that name. On top of that, right now, anyone can get the elite doll Papasha totally free just by logging into the game. And by playing stages and doing missions in the limited time Rhapsody Quartet event, you can earn even more rewards. Plus, starting January 1st, the start of year login event will let you earn up to 1,000 collapse pieces. So there's never been a better time to click my link below or scan this here QR code and start playing Girls Frontline 2. No list of 2024's worst anime would be complete without its biggest disappointment, but I don't think Uzumaki deserves to be too high or low in these rankings, because despite its many faults, there are almost as many worse Junji Ito adaptations out there, and plenty of shows this year alone that are just straight up garbage. Even at its absolute jankiest, the animation is still more impressive than most of the things we're about to talk about, and at least the original story this anime butchers was good at some point. Plus, despite how hard it falls off in the middle, the first episode is genuinely great, and the last one is genuinely alright, which is more than I can say for some bastardizations of all-time classic manga. The storyboarding is excellent throughout, even when the animation can't really keep up. Technically and stylistically speaking, the whole black and white thing is an incredibly bold experiment, and the soundtrack is one of the best of the year, all of which averages out to at least a 4, maybe 5 out of 10 show whose greatest sin is simply making us expect an 11. But then, on the other hand, that chasm between expectation and result does kind of make it feel like a 2 out of 10 at best when you're actually in the middle of watching those middle episodes, far more so than the other high-profile Adult Swim thing that fell off super hard this year. At least Ninja Kamui was still dumb fun in the end. And while I would argue that Blue Lock Season 2's animation and overall production values are, relatively speaking, a much bigger downgrade compared to Season 1, at at least the story that slideshow attempts to tell isn't twisted beyond recognition by the pacing demands of a 5-page per minute manga adaptation. I did spend a whole dedicated video lamenting Uzumaki's production disaster and trying to get to the bottom of what went wrong already, though, so if you want to hear more of my thoughts on it, I'll leave you to check that video out on your own time, while this video moves on to browner pastures. Sports anime have the potential to be some of the hypest anime out there because they're able to focus on and amplify the most exciting aspect of real sports. The human drama, the rivalries, the underdog stories, the zero-to-hero glow-ups. And I don't think I have ever seen an anime with a worse grasp on that principle than High Speed Etoile, a sci-fi formula racing thing that makes you sit through 20 straight minutes of personality-void announcer commentary interrupted by occasional spectator yapping over the worst race scene you have ever watched before you get to hear any of the racers speak or even find out who the protagonist is. This anime insists that viewers get invested in its action before it gives them a chance to even see its characters, and that action is, to put it nicely, not very good. The 3D animation doesn't lend the cars a particular sense of weight or speed. It sounds like the sound designer has never heard a car before in his life, and the all-over-the-place direction makes it hard to follow who's even winning, not that you have any reason to even care. On the other hand, when it comes to 3D character animation, I mean, the competition is pretty fierce this year between Beastars Season 3, Arcane, and Girls Band Cry, but just as all of those shows pushed boundaries of fidelity, smoothness, and dynamism, blurring the line between 3D and 2D, so too has High Speed Etoile arrived at a brilliant and economical solution for clearing the uncanny valley between the two mediums. If you never actually move your character models, you can make a 3D anime look almost exactly like a shitty 2D one where they never move anything but their lips from some angles. Brilliant! Okay, sarcasm aside, while it does make you wait a long time for it and looks mostly terrible doing it, once High Speed Etoile does finally get around to developing its cast, sometime around episode 3, it's still not great. Just a bottom-of-the-barrel cute girls doing cute things thing full of wacky waifus with like one character trait apiece, but there's never been a cute girls doing formula racing things thing before, so that basically guarantees it its own little niche in anime culture until literally anything better comes along, which is enough to save it from being quite as disposable as all this other garbage. God's Games We Play joins last year's third worst anime, Liar Rail, in what I now recognize as an emerging genre of Kakegurui-esque no game no lifey Yu-Gi-Oh! Season 0 likes about teenagers playing ludicrously convoluted high-stakes games where the rules are made up and the points do matter sometimes, but the way they get the points changes arbitrarily every 5 minutes, so good luck keeping track. I have dubbed this genre Calvin Ball anime. And in many respects, God's Games is a much better example of Calvin Ball anime than Liar Rail, in that most of the games are explained well enough for the viewer to at least kind of follow the basic strategy, and the characters aren't allowed to just pull completely random cheat powers out of their ass at the 11th hour of literally every single arc. They're stuck with the same cheat powers the whole way through. So the show never feels like it's wasting your time with arbitrary out-of-nowhere bullshit that invalidates most of the story you just watched. Instead, it wastes your time by being boring as and not even having a story, at least not any kind of overarching one. If a human wins enough games against the gods, they get a wish granted, and if they lose too many, they have to quit the games, and that is technically like a goal and a stake that could serve as the basis of an overarching story, but the main character, Faye Theophilus, doesn't have a wish that he wants granted, or anything to lose for that matter. He just likes playing games a lot and doesn't want to quit playing games, but he probably won't have to because he's the best at games. So he gets chosen to be the games partner of a fallen goddess who also likes games, and then they team up with the girl who can teleport and is self-conscious about whether people think she's good at games, plus another girl who knows she's good at games, but she got over by her last team, and then they play some games. That's it. That's the whole anime. So if, hey, look, this guy's the main character isn't sufficient motivation for you to care whether or not he wins a game and how, then the only real question left to drive you forward from episode to episode is going to be, how stupid can these guys' names get?
俺はダークスギアシミタ
ピザリスベットブリンケットヒューメリケルブリリアント三世
There! Saved you 6 hours. You're welcome. Speaking of forgettable garbage, that's exactly what Toka Mimori is, at least if you ask most of the classmates who he'd never ask not to come to school tomorrow. The protagonist of Failure Frame, I Became the Strongest and Annihilated Everything with Low-Level Spells, finds himself tossed in a magic trash can of a dungeon by the very isekai goddess who summoned him, leaving him to die horribly at the claws of the over-leveled monsters within for the crime of being the lowest tier pull on her school bus gotcha banner. A fate that all of his more popular classmates are all too happy to leave him to, and also they yell at him for killing the vibe by not rolling over and dying faster. Which is, of course, exactly how the show wants us in the audience to feel about those classmates and the goddess as our hero beats the overwhelming odds against him, becomes predictably, unexpectedly super strong, and sets out on a quest for bloody revenge. Or, slow, awkward, Barney purple-tinted revenge, as the case may be, since the low-level spells he uses to annihilate everything are guaranteed hit status effects like Paralyze, Poison, Sleep, Paralyze, Poison, Berserk, Paralyze, Poison, Blind, Paralyze, Poison, Paralyze, and Poison.
Paralyze Poison Paralyze Poison Paralyze 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 Poison 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 Poison.
So, hope you don't like exciting action scenes in your edgy murder-fest anime.
Paralyze Poison.
There is, to be fair, an attempt made to put some strategic limits on his powers and force him to get creative with them, but he immediately finds a workaround for the range limit by attaching his pet slime to his nervous system, and even when he can't do that, all he's got to do is just, like, distract the guy long enough to walk up to him and say 3 syllables. There's also a limit on how many targets he can paralyze and poison at once, but it's 80, and the workaround for that is just kite the baddies around until the other ones die. Plus, by the time it's even an issue, he's got an 8-legged demon elephant horse to do the kiting for him. Though, on that note, if I had to give this show one thing, it would be that the monster designs are really f***ing cool and stylish, and if I had to give it another one, it would be that instead of cat girls, it has giant bipedal leopard people, which is metal as f***. If this was a JRPG, I would play the shit out of it for like half an hour before I got bored, because every fight's the same and the story sucks balls. And no, I'm not just saying that because I'm such a hope and friendship-pilled JRP gamer. I will admit, I do find the utterly relentless misanthropy of Failure Frame to be a bit exhausting. Like, even Shield Hero found time for a f***ing chocobo race or two, bro. The only change of pace from the series' endless drumbeat of people suck and will let you down are a handful of the most risless romance scenes I've ever seen. Like, Protag's sitting alone in an inn with his titty elf companion, and after he compares her otherworldly beauty to a fancy plastic bag, she asks him to wrestle.
私を襲ってください。いえ、この技でしたら短いに。すみません。汗をかいた状態で密着してしまって。トーカ殿の。
Then later, she mixes up some herbal soup to help them both get to sleep, but accidentally she put too much herb juice in her own soup, and also accidentally she used the horny herbs, not the sleepy herbs. But then he's just too revenge-pilled to f*** her anyway, so nothing happens. And at the very end of the series, there's a scene where she kisses him while he's sleeping, but he's not asleep, and then he pretends he doesn't know. And it, like, man, I would almost rather watch the edgy bullshit. Because in principle, I'm not averse to stories about a bunch of evil bastards getting what's coming to them. Those can be cool and fun. The real problem is all the evil bastards are the exact same kind of evil bastard. If they're not high school bullies, they're elf, not just specifically elf. Like, the reason that they get murdered is because Protag walks up on them either trying or talking about trying to an elf. And what's more, all but one of them does it to the same elf. For a second, it seems like the Lord of Curses who uses secret untraceable poison recipes from the now defunct Assassin's Guild to trick people into thinking curses are real and spread fear throughout the populace is just doing all that evil stuff, and that's what makes him evil. But then, literally right before he gets paralyzed poisoned, he's like, oh yeah, and I'm gonna that elf too. And his business partner, the slave combat arena owning Duke, is all like, then after I rig the fight so the slave who thinks she's about to buy her freedom dies, I'm gonna buy the little dark elf slave girl that she was trying to protect and do a grooming with her. You thought I was just a regular guy who makes slaves fight to the death for entertainment, but actually I'm super evil. And of course, he says that literally 2 seconds after the slave who thinks she's one fight away from freedom starts eavesdropping on him, so she can instantly know that running away with the hero that night is the objectively correct course of action. Just like how every time Toka's thinking about maybe murdering someone, they turn to the camera to tell you that they are an objectively irredeemable elf bastard whose death will be both cool and good. Because despite its morally gray, grimdark aesthetic, Failure Frame is as substantively black and white, stupid simple as anime get. A trite, victim complex fueled Sigma male power fantasy about fixing the world by killing all the obviously bad people who are also way dumber than you. It's Death Note minus the moral. Ari Ferretta, but unironically. All edge with no point. It may not be as ugly as most of these other shows on the outside, but it sure as shit makes up for that on the inside. And worse, it's boring about it. Even the next entry down on the list, Demon Lord Retry R, puts more creative effort into setting up its villains as bastards. Like the big scary mercenary guy they introduce being so sadistic that after he beats women to death, he keeps beating up their corpses just because. And they're like, now this big scary guy is gonna go attack Protag-kun's hometown while he's away. And then 10 minutes later, he gets his leg immediately blown off with a sniper rifle in the very next scene he's in, and he's stuffed in a magic soul-eating duffel bag, never to be seen again. So that whole scene was just kind of there to be gratuitously violent. And most of the scenes in Demon Lord Retry R are also just kind of there. An all-time stinker of an isekai sequel that serves as a stark warning to anyone still bitching about that time I got reincarnated as a guy in a bunch of meetings, that things could always be way worse. Like, buddy, you want to talk about wasting time. Retry R spends not one, but 2 entire episodes doing a very inept recap of the first season before sending its hero off on a new quest with a new cast of characters that have nothing to do with anything that was just recapped. A quest to literally just around in a dungeon for a bit until they level up because they don't have anything better to do. The Demon Lord's party arrives in a town where this fat otaku hero guy set up a charity breadline, and the Demon Lord turns invisible to tell that guy that his charity is a sham, and he's all like, yeah, kind of. Then the bad guys are all like, wow, he left his town, let's send that scary mercenary guy to attack him. Then we cut back to the Demon Lord going to a dungeon's entrance area to kill a snail and then a robot, and then all of the assembled adventurers are all like, damn, that guy's so cool, I bet his dick's huge. Then back in the B plot, those guys attack the town, leg comes off, in the duffel bag, The end. Then it's nighttime now, and the Demon Lord's like, I'm gonna teleport back to that dungeon and kill some more robots to level up some more. But then there's these guys in the dungeon who try to rob him with a sleep spell, so the evil ring that's stuck to his finger takes over his brain and smushes them to a fine paste against the walls, and also makes him hallucinate everyone in Shibuya, turning into zombies. Then he finds a crate with a magic gun in it, and after that there's a factory under the dungeon that turns dead monsters and robots into alive monsters and robots. And then under the factory there's this Tron room with dubstep playing and a floating Virtual Boy screen that says, I want to play a game. Which annoys the Demon Lord, so he flicks a cigarette through that, and the room gets mad at him and makes more screens that say, Game over, man. So he throws a knife through those, and that's how the show delivers the plot twist that this fantasy world is actually a sci-fi world, or possibly a simulation, and the creator or administrator or whatever has it out for him.
ただの異世界かと思ったら面白くなってきたじゃねえかよ。
And all that shit happens in just episode 3, which I know seems like a pretty early spot in any season of anything to drop a twist that huge without any setup, but what you're forgetting is those 2 pointless recap episodes that really make it more like dropping that twist without any setup in episode 1. And instead of following up on that, the first half of the next episode's about this evil anime archbishop guy taking a wagon convoy of slaves to visit this blonde dominatrix Statue of Liberty lady and stare at her thighs while she's doing queen decisions for the country that she's the queen of, and those queen decisions are really impressively fast. And then while he's leaving, for no particular reason, he brags about how good he's gonna beat this one particular slave, a falcon-type demi-human named Eagle, who also happens to be the childhood friend of one of the main waifus from the main story, which is exactly the leverage that the queen needed to drive a wedge between the main kingdom and creepy anime Catholicism. So after a huge, air quotes, comedy relief scene full of screaming chibis and literal circus music, she decides to send a sexy ninja dressed as Little Red Riding Hood to pass along a note about it. And you're probably thinking, well, it's season 2 of an anime, so obviously these are all recurring characters being reintroduced. That's why it's all so abrupt and out of nowhere, right? Right? Nope. Statue of Liberty and the whole ass kingdom she rules are brand new elements introduced this season in this scene. And to top it all off, when we do finally get back to the Demon Lord, he's just like, damn, that thing with the screen last episode sure was a big cliffhanger, huh? Before shoving the gun in its crate, shoving that crate into a portal, and instead of dealing with any of that, he just decides to summon a new NPC from the Battle Royale game that he made back on Earth, and she needs yet another recap of everything that's happened so far, which thankfully happens off screen. And then, only in episode 5 does any of the storytelling in the show start building off of anything that we've seen happen in previous episodes or scenes. Now, to be fair, some of these issues can be chalked up to the show's extremely unfortunate and frankly baffling production history. It's not actually a direct sequel to season 1 at all, which was based on the light novels, but rather a new adaptation of the more popular and significantly different manga version of the story that attempts to pick up at roughly the same point in that story where the anime left off, even though a lot of the backstory details and some of the characters and plot shit is different, which must have been an absolute nightmare to work on, but that doesn't really excuse how ugly the animation is, how terrible all of the dialogue is, the agonizing attempts at comedy, or this show's most egregious crime of all, the fact that all of its titles for every episode are stupid little repuns. And if I had a nickel for every terrible isekai thing that did that with its titles this year, the fact that I'd have 2 nickels is unforgivable. Though that is far from the only unforgivable thing in Re-Monster. The reincarnated goblin protagonist, Gabro, is a straight-up who has the unmitigated gall to claim moral superiority over the rest of his species of also because you see, he uses drugs and Stockholm Syndrome to do it instead of physical force. Like, that's the actual story of how he gets his harem. And you know what? The really aggravating part is that in itself might have been not fine, but contextually acceptable. The title does promise an anime about a monster being a monster, after all, which could even make for a refreshing change of pace from all the isekai power fantasies about nerds playing do-gooder RPG hero for people who like edgy bullshit, which can be fun as long as the anime has fun with it, but Remonster isn't fun at all. It's boring as dirt, worse and blander and safer than all those generic isekai put together, with somehow even more shoehorned in RPG elements. And despite having been a psychic cannibal in his past life, Gabro's inner monologue sounds exactly like every other assembly line isekai nerd, which still isn't even the worst of it. The plot is this endless parade of samey scenes about guys fighting fantasy things and then leveling up from fighting those things and then using their new abilities to fight even more things so they can level up some more and fight some more things, and then a different guy fights a different thing and he levels up, and then a girl fights something else and she levels up, and then with nary a but or because in sight. The absolute worst kind of bullet point storytelling, made all the more monotonous by a bizarre daily diary story structure that causes every episode to bleed into the next in this interminable blur of tedium. Yet somehow the animation is even worse than the writing, and the opening is even worse than that. Remonster really wants to be this mature, dark fantasy for adults, but it's presented with all the complexity of a nursery rhyme for toddlers and frequently looks like it was drawn by one. And if you think that's bad, our next anime looks like that toddler broke both his arms. When I roasted the healer who was banished from his party is, in fact, the strongest on Hottest Trash, I made it my priority to get to the only entertaining bit as fast as possible. You know, the bit where Protag goes Super Saiyan out of nowhere and then an undercover cop arrests his old party members for human trafficking.
なんとかしろよ。そうだ、金なら払う。だからな。
そもそも人身売買だって未遂じゃない。
Alright, my bad. But to be clear, the anime does not make getting to that fun bullshit a priority at all. Just to get there, you gotta slog through like 3 straight episodes of the healer guy very slowly dragging his new fangirl party member through dungeons while explaining in painstaking detail things like what a dungeon is, the fact that there are more monsters in dungeons than field areas, and how adventurers trade monster bits for money. And it's not even done with that basic tutorial shit by the time Timu Gilgamesh gets busted. The very next episode has a whole ass scene dedicated to him explaining what a quest is. The whole point of using a generic-ass RPG setting like this is you don't have to explain this shit because all your viewers already play generic-ass RPGs. So you can just focus on the story instead of endlessly dumping exposition. Like, imagine a rom-com where one of the first scenes of Protag interacting with his love interest is him telling her, each room in this building is a classroom wherein a teacher stands in front of a class of students to tell them various facts about the world. Later, they will be quizzed on their recollection of those facts, and the more they can remember, the more likely they will be in future to get good jobs, which are tasks people perform in order to receive currency, which is a token assigned an arbitrary value that can be exchanged for goods and, hey baby, where are you going? I thought we had a connection! That's how this whole anime feels to watch. It's so friggin' boring, I just made up an entirely different anime to complain about instead. There are tiny nuggets of so bad it's entertaining stuff buried under the endless, needless info dumps, but all the arbitrary value tokens in the world would not be enough to make me dig through any more of it. A Nobody's Way Up to an Exploration Hero is set in a world much like our own, except for the parts that are much like Solo Leveling, where dungeons full of monsters just started randomly appearing in modern cities one day. Though, maybe I should say it's more like Dungeons of Hinterberg, since they're permanent, anyone can enter them, and rather than public health hazards, they're more big-time tourist traps, with whole-ass theme parks built around their entrances, advertised by tie-ins with popular TV dramas about professional dungeon explorers f***ing their sisters.
妹よお前を守れてよっこ
兄さんを助けるからこのポーションでさあ飲んで
ダンジョンラブストーリー
Though, frankly, I would rather watch that fake TV show than the real one it's part of, because its central relationship is even weirder and creepier. Protag Kun Kaito has been grinding slimes on level 1 of his local dungeon for years now, going nowhere slow behind the back of his childhood friend whose dad disappeared exploring that dungeon a few years ago, and that's why she doesn't want him to be grinding slimes, and he's gotta lie to her about what he's doing every week, very badly, like he thinks she's the stupidest person on earth.
装備を整えるためにな、スライムを。
スライム
いや、スライスチーズあれさ、パンに乗せてちょっと焼くとムラムラするほど美味しいよね。スライスムラムラってね。
ムラムラはしないけど私もチーズは大好きよ。
だよね。
And I guess she must be, because she believes him, though he does give her a run for her very stupid money with his incredible ability to hear her say stuff like, "Hey Kaito, let's go shopping and ride a boat around a lake this weekend," or "I want to apply to the same school so we can spend every day together taking walks under their super romantic cherry blossoms," and think, I wonder what she meant by that. Gosh, she sure is cute. Shame she only sees me as a friend, though. To be clear, that's not the weird and creepy relationship I was talking about. It's just really annoying, and I hate watching it. The main one starts down in the dungeon when Kaito finally gets his lucky break after grinding his way through slime number 1000, which happens to be a rare little golden guy who drops a magic Pokemon card when he dies. Now, much like a real Pokemon card, Kaito could sell that thing on eBay for lots of money, but our boy's a real gamer at heart who wants to conquer the dungeon himself, not some filthy slabber, so he activates the card to summon himself a mighty Valkyrie familiar, which takes the form of an 8-year-old girl who calls him master and eats magic crystals out of his hand like dog treats. And then she helps him find and kill another rare monster, which drops another Pokemon card, which summons a bratty little succubus. Now, if you squint and look at this relationship sideways, you could maybe pretend it's innocent for a couple episodes, like they're just his little sister-type characters competing for their beloved Oni-chan's attention, but he clearly ain't thinking about it like that.
小さな女の子を2人連れ回しているとか思われたら
And they actually do see him as an Oni-chan, but, you know, just like on the TV. It's rarely that overt, but honestly, I think I might be less skeeved out if it was more shameless about leaning into the fantasy it's obviously selling, instead of trying to hide what it is behind the appropriately aged love interest, kind of like how he's hiding all the time that he spends with 2 underage girls at an amusement park behind her back while worrying about going to jail if he gets caught. That is just way too specific about all the wrong details. And then when it comes to filling in the details of the other side of the fantasy, you know, the genuinely creative concept of dungeons as modern tourist traps, the show's idea of a change in scenery is like putting some puddles of water under the featureless gray cave walls. I don't think I've ever seen a more sauceless fantasy world, and that's almost as much of a crime as the one Protag-kun keeps getting away with. Tasuketsu, Fate of the Majority, is the kind of bad anime I put myself through all this other bad anime to find. The kind that gets so little right in terms of writing, acting, animation, and direction that, like a kid who scores a perfect 0 on a multiple choice quiz, the sheer, improbable scope of its ineptitude becomes impressive in its own way. A show that dares to be so bad, it's kind of awesome.
動いちゃダメぞ。ああ、だから言ったのに。
Speaking of multiple choice, Tasuketsu actually builds its death game around the premise of binary surveys. Every night at midnight, the game master emperor asks a yes or no question, and then everyone with the majority answer instantly dies. These questions are submitted by the players themselves, either via a magic blue postbox or a magic red laptop on a first-come, first-served basis, so the day-to-day gameplay revolves around finding and controlling those submission points with the aid of magic powers called rights, which can do pretty much anything, except make a ruler super sharp so it can cut stuff. One kid tries to bluff he has the power to make his ruler super sharp and cut stuff, but then another kid's like, that's dumb, rights can't do that, and he's right. So that's one rule for how the power system works. Pretty much the only one so far as I can tell, but it is hard to tell because the show packs an entire arc's worth of development and lore dumping into basically every episode. 1 minute, everyone in class is clowning on Protag-kun for his single personality trait of not good at computer and remarking on how weird the screens that just popped up on all the computers are. 3 minutes later, his parents, best friend, and everyone else who didn't see those screens is dead, with his surviving classmates banding together to figure out the rules of the game and survive even more. 3 minutes after that, the dude with the glasses is shooting the deaf kid in the face, and a couple minutes later, they're all running away from him, including the deaf kid, who's fine somehow. Then, after they escape, Protag-kun and his love interest make a vow to survive and beat the game together, and a minute after that, he's dead along with every other man in Tokyo and every other person on Earth, though it's not actually clear that's what happened until they tell you the whole planet died in the episode 11 recap. Don't worry about that too much though, because by the middle of episode 2, everyone who's dead has already gotten better. It wasn't some clever fake out having Protag-kun all over the terribly animated OP even though he dies in episode 1. This is just a death game where death is meaningless, and that's just the beginning of an absolute euthanasia coaster ride of a story that goes from twist to face heel turn to surprise resurrection to crazy superpower fight to heel face turn to tragic character death faster than you can say, wait, what the f? Before you know it, you're watching a guy who traded his testicles for an infinite ammo cheat fighting a guy who traded a lung to bring his Yu-Gi-Oh cards to life, and not long after that, the wannabe Okarun is dead, and Yugi Man is the linchpin of Tokyo's entire power grid. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess, depending on how you look at it, the show does actually slow down quite a bit once it hits its second arc in its 11th episode, using the remaining 14 to properly flesh out a new protagonist and his relationships with the supporting cast, establish a status quo that actually lasts for more than half of one episode, and generally tell a story a human being might be able to follow. It's still not all that good most of the time. Except in the obvious sense that that last clip was amazing. But the plot tying all the not very good bits together is suddenly coherent and even, dare I say it, conceptually interesting. Exploring the death game's aftermath in a depopulated Tokyo on the verge of collapse as two factions led by pretenders to the Emperor's throne, the heroes who beat him and the villainess who wants to carry on his villainous legacy, vie for control of the city's surviving populace and crumbling infrastructure in a series of basically stand battles, which are still, thankfully, hilarious for the most part, but now that hilarity is mixed up with some unironically enjoyable stuff, like the new hero who actually has a personality, antagonists with more motivation than I hate everyone, especially myself, and a central conflict that doesn't feel like the show's just somehow ripping off every other anime in the genre at the same time, while also missing the entire point of a death game that people die when they are killed. It still doesn't really get that point, but that's not nearly as detrimental to what it's going for in the back half when it's not really a death game anymore. Revolving door afterlives are kind of par for the course in dumbass shonen battle shit after all. Again, I don't think it becomes a good anime in the back half, but with those marginal improvements to pacing and presentation, on top of how the genre shift de-emphasizes the life or death tension that all that stupid bullshit was ruining, it almost pulls a reverse Uzumaki, where the sudden miraculous jump from a 1 out of 10 to an almost 5 makes it feel like a relative 7, even though the average across all episodes is like a 3, 3.5 at best. Plus, the first 10 are still far and away the worst-paced, stupidest death game story I have ever seen animated, which, if you've watched the King's Game roast, you know is a statement. The glow-up at the end is enough to save this show from first place, but the fact that you have to sit through all that to get to it is more than enough to keep it in second. The whole thing is an extremely fun kind of bad from start to finish, though, and I'd kind of like to give it the dedicated roast treatment at some point in the near future, if you guys are interested. Also, on that note, I've been thinking about self-harming with X-Arm at some point, so if that's something you want to see, let me know. On the other hand, I never want to have to talk or think about the first worst anime of 2024 again after this, because the banished former hero lives as he pleases, goes even further beyond the so bad it's goodness of Tasuketsu to loop back around to being so bad it's bad. You might remember this one for the particularly shitty bit of dialogue I showcased on Spring's Hottest Trash, or for the incredibly stupid plot of its first half, which I also recapped in that roast, wherein the Archduke Craig is so let down by his reincarnated hero's son, Alan, pretending not to have any cool RPG hero skills after his mom dies from her RPG skill of being destined to be a dead RPG hero's mom, that Craig decides to build an entire political ideology around hating the RPG skill system, sells his soul to a demon to level up a bunch, and tries to prove that stat levels are better than RPG skills by doing a coup. If you don't remember that, or you don't believe that that could actually be the actual story of an actual anime that actually exists, then go check that roast out to prep yourself for the rest of this video, because I'm about to be recapping the other half of the show, in part to permanently put myself off the hook for ever having to talk about its story again, and also because there is nothing meaner that I could possibly say about this anime than simply telling you more things that happen in it. The second half sees Alan and his companions heading off to a hostile neighboring empire because they felt like going sightseeing there, where they quickly learn that the Emperor has been assassinated and his most elite knights, the Black Wolves, have instituted martial law in preparation for shit really hitting the fan. Which it kinda seems to be doing right as they arrive, when a building blows up and a guy comes running up to stab Alan out of nowhere, prompting Alan to karate chop him, which causes him to be covered in a misaligned layer of evil purple energy that makes his face explode. This then prompts the knights to have several questions that Alan is in no way prepared to answer, so now he and the gang have got to turn invisible and go into hiding at his friend Henriette's place, who just so happens to be the reincarnation of the very goddess who once gave Alan his Navi tutorials back when he was a hero, and also just so happens to refer to herself exclusively in the third person. A very bold choice for a plot that will eventually hinge on the audience not wanting her to die. But before it can get there, instead of following up on any of those intriguing plot hooks, they just sort of walk off to a magic elven forest for a couple episodes where they find out that their elf blacksmith buddy is in fact the last living heir to the elven throne, which the elves would very much like her to sit on, please, because elves, much like bees, cannot reproduce without a monarch. Also, they're kind of racist, so immigration's just straight out for population growth, aside from these 2 demon refugee kids that they decided to take in on a temporary 100-year visitor visa on Henriette's recommendation and out of the goodness of their heart. But then this even more racist night guy shows up to arrest the hero, only to fly into a rage and start exploding stuff because he saw those demon kids, causing the racist kid who bullied those kids to learn a valuable lesson about how racism is bad after Alan kicks that guy's ass. And somehow that results in Henriette having to take the fall for the assassination of the Emperor right after everyone else has decided to pack up and go home and not solve the elves' reproduction crisis after all. But then they decide not to leave because Henriette's cousin Curtis is all like, hey guys, could you please help me help her not take the fall for that assassination? So they go to do that and fight the knights a couple more times along the way, including the racist knight again, who tries to blow up a whole town of people this time just to get to Alan, but what he didn't count on is Alan can T-pose to assert dominance over time itself. Then, after they finally make it to the capital, the cousin's suddenly like, hey guys, never mind, you know what? If you help her, it's just gonna be a big international incident. You guys should just go home. Which he does because it turns out that cousin Curtis was, in fact, the secret mastermind behind the Knights and also the Emperor's assassination all along. Though the second one wasn't really his fault. He was just trying to make a pact with a demon to f his cousin, and the demon got really creative with the specifics. But then Alan, who, let me remind you, would have f***ed off back home a week ago and never known any of this was happening if he wasn't stopped by Curtis specifically, decides to come back and murder his incest freak ass at the last minute, because the moral of the story is don't be a hero when people ask for your help, be a hero when you feel like it, even if they specifically ask you not to help. And we never learn who the guy who blew up that first building was or why he did it. The end. Banished Hero is a complete failure of storytelling on every conceivable level, really. Sets up questions it never answers, answers questions it never sets up. The big bads are literally named Craig and Curtis. If you brought this script to a creative writing class, your teacher would quit. It absolutely baffles me how this absolute dog shit ever got an anime adaptation, and it seems like everyone working on it felt the exact same way, because the whole show looks like that crippled toddler was taught to draw again using only his feet by the animators of Zelda Wand of Gamelon. This studio gave up so hard, the show's only good joke is about how hard they gave up.
します観光アレン君遅いですね牛さん20頭目だね
So glad I will never have to look at or think about this f***ing thing again, and it felt so good to get all this crap off my chest. If you haven't seen it yet, make sure to check out my double-decker list of the best and trashiest anime of the year, where I'm sure you'll find some stuff you actually want to watch in both categories. Though, to do some real quick housekeeping on that right now, I did forget to put the avant-garde low-stakes mystery series Shoshimin in my short list of honorable mentions when I was compiling those, so my bad on that. And while Jellyfish Can't Swim in the Night was actually on that list, I somehow crossed it out without actually writing the little blurb that I wanted to about how it's a beautifully directed story exploring personal expression as it manifests in both art and aspects of identity that is just a ton of fun to watch. Okay, that out of the way, please go watch the good lists now, or if you've seen them already, last year's lists were also really fun, and you can hear me talk about Freerun there. I'm Geoff Thew, the world's tiredest man, wishing you a happy new year, and me, sleep now, please.